That's nuts.
Odd sayings and expressions with crazy origins. Cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey. You probably use tons of expressions, idioms, and slang phrases every day that don't make literal sense. Sometimes you can figure out the origins of these phrases. However, some expressions are so crazy that it's impossible to guess where on earth they originated from. Let's explore some common idioms and phrases to see if we can figure out the meanings and origins behind them. Stick around to the end to find out the meaning behind the phrase, "It's cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey." Minding your P's and Q's. This is a phrase we hear a lot when adults are speaking to children. This is a term that has come to signify that you are watching what you're doing and paying attention to the details. This dates back to a time when local taverns, pubs, and bars served their drinks by the quart and by the pint. Barmaids had to keep an eye on customers and keep the drinks coming. They had to pay special attention to who was ordering pints and who was ordering quarts. Thus, the term came to be known as minding your P's and Q's. Turn a blind eye. This usually means to ignore a situation, facts, or reality. The background is based on a British admiral who had one blind eye. There was an attacking fleet of Danish ships, and the British forces signaled for the admiral to stop them. He held up a telescope to his blind eye and said, "I do not see the signal." Nevertheless, he attacked and was victorious. Cost an arm and a leg. This is a common phrase that simply means it's going to cost a lot of money. This phrase dates back to the 1700s. Since there were no cameras, if you wanted a portrait to be taken, it had to be painted or sculpted. If you look at some of these old paintings, you'll notice that they're usually just faces, sometimes a person with one arm behind their back. In these times, portraits were not charged by the number of people who appeared in the picture, but rather by the number of limbs that were painted. Artists knew that it took a lot more time and effort to paint arms and hands, so for a full body portrait, one would say it was going to cost them an arm and a leg. Bury the hatchet. This phrase means to stop a conflict and make peace. This one dates back to the early times in North America when the Puritans were in conflict with the Native Americans. When negotiating peace, the Native Americans would bury all their hatchets, knives, clubs, and tomahawks. Weapons were literally buried to make them inaccessible. Cold shoulder. If someone is said to give us the cold shoulder, this means that they are disregarding, dismissing, or otherwise ignoring us and treating us with disrespect. The origin of this term has been disputed over the years. One viable theory is that it came from serving an unwanted guest a cold shoulder of mutton as opposed to a nice hot meal like the rest of the guests. Another theory is that it came from keeping one's back, or at least a shoulder, in between yourself and the unwanted person. In either case, this shows disdain and disregard. Caught red-handed. This phrase is used to reference a person caught in the act of doing something wrong. It originates from Old English laws that ordered any person to be punished for butchering an animal that wasn't his own. The only way a person could be convicted was if they were caught with the animal's blood still on their hands. They were literally caught red-handed. Mind your own beeswax. Now, honestly, I have to admit that I thought that this one was just mimicking a more common and literal phrase, mind your own business. However, it turns out that there's a more defined origin. Apparently, in the early days before there was Stridex and Clearasil, ladies would use beeswax to smooth their complexion where they had acne. There were actually several phrases that came from this practice. If a lady looked too long and stared at another lady's face, they would often say, "Mind your own beeswax." Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This simply means don't get rid of valuable things along with unnecessary ones. In the 1500s, people only bathed once a year. Not only that, but they also bathed in the same water without cleaning it. Adult males would bathe first, then the females. Children and babies would go last. By the time the babies got in, the water was clouded with filth. The poor mothers had to take extra care that their babies were not thrown out with the bathwater. Go the whole 9 yards. This means to give it everything you have. During World War II, the fighter pilots were equipped with 9 yards of ammunition. When they ran out, it meant that they had tried their best at fighting off the target using all of their ammunition. They had literally given it everything that they had. Straight from the horse's mouth. When we hear someone say, "I heard it straight from the horse's mouth," we know that they mean that they heard it directly from the source. The truth is that horses have always been prized commodities throughout the ages. People would often lie about a horse's age in order to get more money for the horse. Anyone who knew anything about horses knew that you could tell the age of a horse by examining its teeth. This meant they could literally get the truth straight from the horse's mouth. Heard it through the grapevine. This phrase has come to reference something that is heard unofficially or indirectly. It originated at the turn of the century when the telegraph was getting off the ground. Important information was transmitted across the country using the telegraph system. The system required thousands of miles of wire to be installed, and this wire was held in place several feet above the ground with poles at equal intervals. People thought that the wires and poles looked like the strings used to train vines, so the telegraph lines became known as the grapevine. People then started referring to hearing things through the grapevine. And now my personal favorite, cold enough to freeze the balls off of a brass monkey. This phrase is far less popular, but it's so odd that we just couldn't leave it off of our list. Back in the day, sailing ships, including warships and freighters, carried cannons. Cannons fire round iron balls. It was important to keep a steady supply of cannonballs ready at a moment's notice. However, cannonballs are not easy to secure on a moving ship. Sailors would stack the balls in a square-based pyramid. One ball would be on the top, resting on 4 balls, resting on 9, and so on. They would stack the cannonballs in stacks of 30 this way. They would make a metal plate of iron, called a monkey, with 16 round indentations to hold the cannonballs on the bottom layer. There was one big problem with this practice. Since the balls and the plate were both made of iron and the ship was in a very moist environment, the balls would easily rust to the plate, making them difficult to move. In order to solve this problem, they made the monkeys out of brass. What they didn't realize was that brass and iron react to cold differently. Brass contracts faster and further than iron when it is chilled. When the temperature dropped too far, the brass indentations would shrink so much that the iron cannonballs would come right off the monkey. Thus, it was quite literally cold enough to freeze the balls off of a brass monkey. Do you have any other nutty ideas for us to research? If you do, let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of our other nutty videos. Thanks for watching.